He had been sleeping beside me for 3 years, but I didn't know I was sharing a bed with a stranger until that night. Good afternoon, my dears. My name is Ophelia Mitchell. I'm 82 years old, and today I'm going to share with you a story from my youth that completely changed the course of my life. A story of betrayal, pain, and above all, triumph. Before I begin, I'd like to ask you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It's always a joy to know that my stories reach so many different places. It was 1964, and I was just 21 years old. America was experiencing political turbulence with the civil rights movement, but in my small world, I only worried about being a good wife to Charles Freeman, whom I had married 3 years earlier, right after turning 18. We were what people called the perfect couple in our small town in Kentucky. I was a dedicated young woman who helped with household expenses through my sewing work, and he was a respected employee at the local railway station. Our house was simple but tidy. I woke up every day at 5 a.m. to prepare Charles's coffee before he left for work. Then I would clean everything and sit at my Singer sewing machine, a gift from my late mother. That machine was my breadwinner and my companion during the long afternoons. In the early years of marriage, Charles always came home at the same time, 6 p.m. I'd hear the whistle from the station train and know that 15 minutes later he would be walking through our door. He was so punctual that I could set the clock by his arrival. We would have dinner together, talk about our day, and on Sundays we would go to church and then visit his mother, Mrs. Eleanor, who lived on the other side of town. But things began to change subtly. First came the delays. Charles started arriving home later and later, always with the same excuse. "Overtime at the station, Ophelia. We're very busy." I accepted it, of course. After all, extra money was always welcome for a young couple like us. Then I noticed the changes in his behavior. He started dressing up more for work. Before, he would leave the house in the simple uniform of the station, but he began to use cologne, to comb his hair more carefully, to choose better shirts to wear under his uniform. "The boss has been demanding more presentable employees," he explained. And naive as I was, I believed him. I remember it as if it were yesterday. It was a Wednesday in July. There was a typical chill in the evening air. Charles arrived particularly late that night, almost 9 o'clock. He ate dinner in silence, took a shower, and went to bed early, saying he was exhausted. I stayed in the living room a little longer, finishing a dress I had promised to the pharmacist's wife. When I finally went to bed, around 11, Charles was already sound asleep. I lay down beside him carefully so as not to wake him. That's when it happened. In the middle of the night, I woke up to Charles tossing and turning in bed. I thought he was having a nightmare, but soon realized he was talking in his sleep. I listened carefully and heard clearly, "Delilah, my flower, you're so beautiful." My heart raced. Delilah? Who was Delilah? The only face that came to mind was that of Mr. Anthony's daughter, the owner of the grocery store where we did our shopping. A single young woman, a few years younger than me, with long black hair and piercing green eyes. She always greeted us with a smile when we went shopping, and I had never noticed anything strange. Could it be her? I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. Thousands of thoughts ran through my head. I could be mistaken. It could be another Delilah, or it could just be a meaningless dream of Charles, but something inside me knew there was more to this story. The next morning, I prepared coffee, as I always did, but my heart was heavy. Charles didn't seem to notice anything different. He kissed my forehead before leaving, as he always did, and promised not to be late. As soon as he left, I collapsed in tears at the kitchen table. After crying for almost an hour, I dried my tears and decided I needed answers. I wouldn't confront Charles yet, not without being sure. I began to observe patterns more closely. In the weeks that followed, I noticed that he always managed to stop by Mr. Anthony's grocery store alone. Before, we would do the shopping together on Saturdays, but now he would always say, "Don't worry, Ophelia, I'll stop by after work and bring what we need." One day I took courage and decided to follow my intuition. I told Charles I was going to visit my sister Constance in the neighboring town and that I would return only in the late afternoon. He seemed relieved by the news, which only increased my suspicions. Instead of going to my sister's house, I watched the grocery store from a distance. I hid behind a tree in the square across the street, where I had a good view of the store entrance. I waited for almost 2 hours. When I was about to give up, I saw Charles enter the grocery store. My heart raced. Minutes later, I saw Delilah leave through the back of the store, looking around as if she didn't want to be seen. Shortly after, Charles also left, not through the front door, but by the same path Delilah had taken. The two walked separately, but in the same direction, toward the small woods behind the church. With trembling legs and my heart in my throat, I followed them. I kept a safe distance, hiding behind trees and bushes. They stopped in a small clearing in the woods, where there was a wooden bench half hidden by vegetation. That's when I saw my husband embrace and kiss that woman in the most passionate way imaginable. I got close enough to hear their conversation, taking care not to be seen. What I heard shattered my heart into 1,000 pieces. "When are you going to tell her?" Delilah asked, her head resting on Charles's shoulder. "Patience, my dear. I'll find a way soon," he replied, stroking her hair. "It's been almost 6 months, Charles. You always say the same thing." "I know, my flower, but I need to do this the right way. Ophelia is too naive, stuck in that house with that old sewing machine. She would never suspect us, but I still need to be careful. If I just leave her, the whole town will turn against me." And then, to my complete horror, he laughed at my naivety, at my trust. "She believes everything I say. Yesterday I got home at 9 p.m. after being with you, and she didn't even question it, just asked if I wanted dinner." That laugh echoed in my head, as if it were the cruelest sound I had ever heard. My husband was not only cheating on me, but mocking me with his mistress. The man who had promised eternal love before the altar was now making fun of my trust. I returned home like a ghost, dragging my feet along the way, dried tears on my face, a huge emptiness in my chest. When Charles arrived that night, I pretended everything was normal. I served dinner, asked about his day. I smiled at the right moments, but inside, something had died. That night, as he slept, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I thought about confronting him, making a scene, telling the whole town. I thought about leaving the next day, going back to my parents' house. I even thought about throwing myself onto the train tracks, such was the pain I felt, but then a strange calm came over me. No, I wouldn't do any of that. I would show Charles Freeman that the naive girl he thought he had married wasn't so naive after all. I would get revenge in a way he would never forget. And so my plan was born. A plan that would require patience, intelligence, and a lot of strength. I didn't know yet how I would do it, but I knew I wouldn't leave that situation as a victim. And it was that night, with a broken heart but a determined mind, that the naive girl died, and the woman I would become was born. What I didn't know was that this painful betrayal would be the beginning of my liberation. The morning after that devastating discovery, I woke up with a clarity I had never felt before. As I prepared coffee for Charles, I observed his every movement with different eyes. The way he bit into his toast, how he spread butter on his bread, how he sipped his coffee in small gulps. Everything now seemed part of a grand performance to me. Behind this man, I thought I knew so well was a stranger. "The coffee is especially good today, Ophelia," he commented, without looking up from his newspaper. I smiled in response, a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Would he notice the difference? Of course not. Charles only saw what he wanted to see. A dedicated, submissive, convenient wife. As soon as he left for work, I began to elaborate my plan. The first thing I did was check our savings. Like every good wife of that era, I didn't have direct access to Charles's salary. He would give me a weekly amount for household expenses and keep the rest. But I had my own secret money, the fruit of my sewing work. For years, I had saved every penny I could in a small safe hidden inside the lining of my Singer sewing machine. It was my rainy day fund, as my mother had taught me to have. A woman always needs to have her own money, Ophelia, because you never know what tomorrow will bring, she used to say. How right my mother was. I opened the hiding place and counted my savings. It wasn't much, but it would be enough to take the first steps. I closed the safe and hid it again with even more care. That money would be my freedom. The second step of my plan was more complicated. I needed to find out more about Charles and Delilah's relationship. How long had it been going on? Who else knew? What was their plan? For this, I would do something I never imagined myself capable of. I would get closer to Delilah. I waited 3 days to put this part of the plan into action. On Friday, I wore my best dress, a navy blue one with small white flowers that I had sewn for myself the previous year, and went to the grocery store. I chose a time when I knew Charles would be busy at the station, around 10 in the morning. When I entered the grocery store, I saw Delilah behind the counter. Our eyes met for an instant, and I noticed a slight blush on her cheeks. She knew who I was, of course. Even so, she greeted me with a cordial smile, as she did with all customers. "Good morning, Mrs. Freeman. How can I help you today?" she asked in that honeyed voice that now gave me chills. "Good morning, Delilah. I came to buy thread for my sewing work. I have many orders lately." We talked about trivial things while she showed me the available threads. Then, as if casually, I let slip. "You know, Delilah, I'm thinking of taking more dress orders. You have such good taste in clothes. Have you ever thought about ordering something from me?" I saw her eyes light up. Vanity was always good bait. "Oh, you think so? I would love to, Mrs. Freeman. I always admire the dresses you make for the ladies in town." And so I laid the first part of my trap. Before leaving the grocery store, we arranged for her to come to my house the following week to choose fabrics and patterns. I walked back home with a heavy heart, but an increasingly determined mind. In the weeks that followed, I intensified my sewing work. I accepted all the orders I could get, even those I would normally refuse for being too labor-intensive or paying too little. The more money I could save, the better. In parallel, I cultivated my friendship with Delilah. She came regularly to my house for dress fittings, and I took advantage of these moments to extract information. Without her realizing it, I guided our conversations toward topics like romances, secrets, and the future. Delilah, perhaps out of remorse, or simply because she was young and reckless, ended up revealing small details that pieced together the puzzle. "You know, Mrs. Freeman," she said to me one day as I adjusted the hem of an emerald green dress I was making for her, "sometimes I think about leaving this town, seeing new places." "Really? And where would you go?" I asked, sticking more pins into the fabric. "New York, maybe. They say a girl can have more opportunities there, not just getting married and having children." "And would you go alone?" I questioned, keeping my eyes on the fabric to hide my real interest in the answer. She hesitated for a moment. "Who knows? Sometimes we meet people who change our plans." At that moment, I was sure that she and Charles were planning to run away together. My stomach twisted, but I kept my hands steady at work. While I sewed for Delilah, I also got closer to Mrs. Judith, our town's biggest gossip. Mrs. Judith knew everything about everyone and spread information as fast as a wildfire through dry straw. I began to do small sewing jobs for her, often charging less than normal, just to cultivate this relationship. During our conversations, I planted the first seed of my plan. "Mrs. Judith, have you noticed how Charles has been looking unwell lately?" I commented during one of our fitting sessions. "Unwell? I haven't noticed anything, Ophelia." "Well, I'm worried. He's been having cold sweats during the night, sometimes wakes up shaking and looks so pale." I saw Mrs. Judith's eyes widen with interest. Nothing excited the town gossip more than a new and juicy topic. Could it be something serious? Has he been to Dr. Arthur? "Not yet. He's so stubborn. Says it's nothing, that it will pass soon, but I'm really worried. His brother, the one who lived in Louisville, you know, died young with similar symptoms." Charles didn't have a brother in Louisville, of course, but Mrs. Judith didn't know that and wouldn't bother to verify. Even before I left her house, I could imagine how that information would spread throughout the town. In parallel, I continued with my savings. Every penny I earned from sewing, I meticulously saved. I started buying less food, mending my own clothes instead of making new ones, saving on small luxuries I used to allow myself, like a scented soap or a hair ribbon. Charles, absorbed in his affair with Delilah, barely noticed these small changes. When he asked why I hadn't bought this or that, I would answer with a half-truth. Prices are so high, dear. I'm trying to save. The third part of my plan involved my sister Constance, who lived in New York City. Constance was 5 years older than me and had moved to the big city after marrying an accountant. Through carefully written letters so that Charles wouldn't suspect if he read them, I asked for information about what life was like in the big city, what opportunities existed for a skilled seamstress like me. Constance responded with enthusiasm. New York was growing rapidly. There were many clothing factories hiring, and with my talent, she was sure I would find work quickly. "If you want to come, you can stay with us until you get settled," she wrote, without asking questions about the reason for my sudden interest. As the months passed, rumors about Charles' mysterious illness spread throughout the town, thanks to Mrs. Judith's sharp tongue. I noticed how some people began to look at him with pity or curiosity when they saw us together at Sunday church or shopping. Charles, confused by those looks, came to ask me if something strange was happening. "I don't know, dear. The people in this town have always been a bit strange," I replied innocently. Meanwhile, my friendship with Delilah grew. She already considered me almost a confidant, someone she could trust. In one of these conversations, she revealed that she was saving money for an important move. "I have a dream, Mrs. Freeman, a dream that will soon come true," she said with sparkling eyes. "That's good, my dear." "We all need dreams," I replied, feeling a pang in my chest imagining that this dream included my husband. The emerald green dress I was sewing for Delilah was almost ready. It was the most beautiful I had ever made, with a cut that enhanced her slender waist and a discreet but elegant neckline. When she came for the final fitting, her eyes filled with tears of emotion. "It's perfect, Mrs. Freeman. It seems made for a very special occasion." "And is it for a special occasion?" I asked, adjusting the fall of the skirt. She blushed intensely. "Well, yes, something very important is going to happen soon." At that moment, I decided it was time to put the final phase of my plan into action. Charles' birthday was approaching. It would be in 2 weeks. Traditionally, we would just have a simple dinner, sometimes inviting his parents or a close friend. But that year, I had other plans. "I was thinking of doing something different for your birthday this year," I commented casually during dinner a few days later. "Different how?" he asked suspiciously. "A bigger dinner with some friends. It's been a while since we had anyone over." To my surprise, he accepted the idea easily. "Sounds good. Who were you thinking of inviting?" I listed some names: colleagues of his from the railway station, neighbors, his best friend, August. And then, as if it were nothing, I added, "I was also thinking of inviting Mr. Anthony and his family. They always treat us so well at the grocery store." I saw a flash of concern in Charles's eyes, which quickly disappeared. "Sure, why not?" he replied, trying to seem disinterested. In the days leading up to the party, I intensified my preparations. Not just the visible ones, the food, the house arrangements, the invitations, but also the invisible ones, those that were part of my secret plan. I sent an urgent letter to my sister Constance, confirming that I would be going to New York. I bought a train ticket for the day after Charles's birthday. I packed a small suitcase with my most essential clothes and few valuables, hiding it at the bottom of the closet, under blankets we didn't use in the summer. On the eve of the birthday, I made one last test with Delilah. "So, will you wear the green dress tomorrow?" I asked when she came to pick up the finished piece. "Tomorrow?" She seemed confused. "Yes, for Charles's birthday. You received the invitation I sent to your parents, didn't you?" I saw panic cross her face like a storm cloud. "Oh yes, of course, but I don't know if we can make it. Father has been so busy with the grocery store." "What a shame. But if they can't come, you could come representing the family. Charles would be so happy." She gulped, not knowing how to refuse without seeming rude. I'll see what I can do, Mrs. Freeman." That night, I slept soundly for the first time in months. All the pieces were in place. The stage was set. Now all that was left was the grand final presentation. The day of Charles's birthday dawned with a cloudless blue sky, one of those perfect days that seemed taken from a postcard. I woke up before sunrise and watched my husband sleeping beside me. How was it possible that I still shared a bed with someone who had broken my heart into so many pieces? I took a deep breath. It would be the last time. I spent the entire day preparing everything for the party. I made Charles's favorite cake, a cornbread with apple that he had loved since childhood. I prepared finger foods and other snacks that I had learned to make from my mother. I cleaned the house like never before, polishing every surface until it shined. I wanted everything to be perfect for that night. When Charles arrived from work, he seemed genuinely surprised by my effort. "Wow, Ophelia, you've outdone yourself," he commented, looking at the table set with our best lace tablecloth inherited from my grandmother and the silver cutlery that we only used on very special occasions. "It's an important day," I replied with a smile that revealed nothing of my plans. "Why don't you take a shower while I finish the last preparations? The guests will start arriving in an hour." While Charles was getting ready, I gave the final touches to the decoration and to myself. I wore my second-best dress, a wine-colored one that suited me well, and tied my hair in a simple but elegant bun. The best dress, a sky-blue one that I had recently finished sewing, was carefully folded in the suitcase hidden in the closet. It would be with that one that I would start my new life. The guests began to arrive punctually at 7 o'clock. First came the Olivers, our longtime neighbors, then Charles's colleagues from the railway station, followed by his childhood friend, August, and his wife. Charles' parents arrived a little later, Mr. Gerald and Mrs. Eleanor, bringing a gift wrapped in colorful paper. I received everyone with warm smiles, serving snacks and passion fruit punch, circulating among the guests like the perfect hostess. Inside, my heart was racing, counting the minutes. At 8 o'clock, when I was starting to think she wouldn't come, I heard the doorbell ring one more time. I opened the door, and there was Delilah, radiant in the emerald green dress I had made with such care. My stomach contracted, seeing how truly beautiful she looked in it. "Good evening, Mrs. Freeman," she said, visibly nervous. "My parents send their apologies, but they couldn't come. I came to represent them." "I'm glad you came, Delilah," I replied, giving her a hug that caught her by surprise. "Please, come in. Charles will be happy to see you." The expression on Charles's face when he saw Delilah enter the room was priceless. First surprise, then panic. Finally, an unsuccessful attempt to appear casual. I saw how he gulped, how his eyes jumped from Delilah to me and back to her, trying to decipher what was happening. "Look who's here, dear," I exclaimed loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Delilah came to represent her family. Isn't that kind?" Charles mumbled something inaudible and nodded, clearly uncomfortable. Delilah, in turn, looked like a frightened rabbit, not knowing where to run. The party continued with an underlying tension that only the three of us could feel. The other guests chatted animatedly, oblivious to the drama that was unfolding silently. I served dinner, roast chicken with potatoes, rice, and a coleslaw that was my mother's specialty. Everyone complimented the food, including Charles, who ate little and drank more wine than usual. After dinner came the moment for the cake. I put the 29 candles, one for each year of Charles's life, and lit them one by one. When I brought the cake to the dining table, everyone began to sing "Happy Birthday." I observed the faces around the table, sincere smiles, affectionate looks, all directed at a man who deserved none of it. After Charles blew out the candles and cut the first piece of cake, I announced that I had a statement to make. The chatter of conversations ceased, and all eyes turned to me. I want to thank all of you for your presence on this special night, I began, feeling my voice firmer than it had ever been. As you know, we are celebrating my husband Charles's birthday, who turns 29 today. I paused, feeling the weight of each word I was about to say. A little over 6 months ago, I began to notice changes in Charles. He was distant, coming home late, always with the excuse of overtime at the station. As a dedicated wife, I was worried, especially when I noticed other symptoms: night sweats, occasional tremors, a paleness that wasn't characteristic of him. I saw Charles' eyes widen in confusion. The guests, in turn, exchanged worried glances. Mrs. Judith, the town gossip, adjusted herself in her chair, clearly interested in every word. I insisted that he see Dr. Arthur, but you know how stubborn men are, I continued, eliciting some smiles of understanding among the women present. He always said it was just fatigue, that it would pass soon. I paused again, observing how Charles was beginning to sweat, exactly as I had described. But today, on his birthday, I want to share with you a discovery I made. Something that perfectly explains Charles's symptoms, something that finally clarifies everything. I walked slowly to the small chest in the dining room and opened the top drawer. From there, I took out a brown envelope. The silence in the room was so dense you could hear a pin drop. "This envelope contains the truth," I said, returning to my place at the table. "A truth that everyone deserves to know." I carefully opened the envelope and took out some photographs. They were photos of Charles and Delilah together, captured in intimate moments in the woods behind the church. I hadn't really taken those photos. I didn't own a camera and wouldn't know how to use one without being noticed. They were, in fact, quite realistic drawings that I had commissioned from an artist in a neighboring town, based on the detailed descriptions I provided. From a distance, they looked like genuine photographs. I placed the photos on the table where everyone could see them. There were gasps of surprise, some murmurs of indignation. I saw Delilah's face transform into a mask of horror. Charles, in turn, turned as white as a ghost. "These are the proofs of the true affliction that plagues my husband," I declared, with a calm I didn't even know I possessed. "It's not a mysterious disease, as some rumors around town suggested. It's something much simpler and older: betrayal." The guests' looks alternated between the photos: Charles, Delilah, and me. Mrs. Eleanor, Charles' mother, brought her hands to her mouth in shock. Mr. Gerald frowned, disapproval evident on his wrinkled face. "I would like to make a toast," I continued, raising my wine glass, "to the new life that begins today. Charles and Delilah can finally assume their romance without needing to hide. As for me, I'm leaving." The silence that followed was deafening. Charles finally found his voice, though it trembled visibly. "Ophelia, this is... You don't understand. I can explain." "There's nothing to explain, Charles," I interrupted, still maintaining my composure. "I understand perfectly. I understand that while I spent hours bent over my sewing machine to help with household expenses, you were meeting Delilah in the woods behind the church. I understand that when you said you were working overtime, you were actually in her arms. I understand that you laughed at my naivety, calling me silly behind my back. I saw tears in Delilah's eyes, who seemed to want to disappear. Charles, in turn, was desperately trying to save his reputation. It's a lie. These photos are fake. She's making it all up." August, Charles's childhood friend, picked up one of the photos and examined it closely. "It looks like you, Charles, and this is indeed Delilah." I, Charles stammered without managing to form a coherent sentence. It was then that I took another document from my dress pocket. This one was real, a train ticket to New York, dated for the next day. "Tomorrow morning I catch the 7 a.m. train to New York," I announced. "I already have a place to stay and promises of work." As for this house, I took another document from the envelope, a letter from the owner confirming our rental agreement. "As everyone knows, this house is rented. I spoke with Mr. Jacobs, the owner, and he agreed to transfer the contract to my name. I paid 3 months of rent in advance with my savings. I turned directly to Charles, looking him in the eyes for the first time that night. You can continue living here if you want, but now the rent will be paid to me. I made a deal with Mr. Jacobs. I'll be the intermediary. The amount will be the same as we were paying, plus 10%. Consider it a convenience fee. The guests seemed to be watching a play, mouths open with each twist. Mrs. Judith absorbed every word, certainly already planning how she would spread this juicy story around town the next day. Charles, completely demoralized, tried one last appeal. Ophelia, please, let's talk in private. This is between us. We don't need to expose. There's nothing more for us to talk about, Charles, I cut him off. For months you exposed our marriage to ridicule, meeting Delilah in corners of the town. Now it's my turn to expose the truth. I turned to the guests who remained silent, stunned witnesses to this public reckoning. I apologize for turning what should have been a celebration into this, but I thought everyone deserved to know the truth, especially Charles's parents, who always treated me like a daughter. Mrs. Eleanor was crying silently, consoled by her husband. The other guests seemed not to know where to look or what to say. The cake is delicious, I added, as if we were having a perfectly normal conversation. Please, help yourselves. It would be a shame to waste it. Naturally, no one touched the cake. One by one, the guests began to stand up, muttering awkward apologies as they withdrew. Delilah was the first to leave, practically running to the door, her face washed in tears. Her sobs echoed through the night as she disappeared down the street. Charles' parents were the last to leave. Mrs. Eleanor hugged me tightly before departing. "Forgive my son, Ophelia," she whispered in my ear. "I already have, Mrs. Eleanor," I replied, returning the hug. "But forgiving doesn't mean accepting being made a fool." Mr. Gerald, always a man of few words, just squeezed my shoulder with his rough hand and gave his son a look of deep disappointment before leaving. When we were finally alone, Charles collapsed in a chair, head in his hands. "Why did you do this, Ophelia? Why didn't you talk to me first? Did you need to humiliate me in front of everyone?" I began to collect the plates and cutlery with all the calm in the world, ignoring his laments. "Answer me, for God's sake," he shouted, pounding his fist on the table. I stopped what I was doing and faced him. All the fear, all the insecurity I had ever felt towards Charles had disappeared. In its place, just a quiet certainty. "You ask me why? When was the last time you worried about what I felt, Charles? When you met Delilah in the woods and laughed at my naivety, did you think about how I would feel? When you murmured her name in your sleep beside me, did you consider how much that would hurt me?" He looked at me confused. "In my sleep? What are you talking about?" "That's how I found out. You talked in your sleep. Delilah, my flower, you would say." After that, it was easy to put the pieces together. Understanding finally dawned on his face. "Ophelia, I'm sorry. I never meant to." "Spare me, Charles. Your apologies come too late. Tomorrow I'll be on the 7 a.m. train. You can keep the house, the furniture, everything. Just don't forget to pay the rent on time. I'll leave my sister's address in New York where you can send the money." I went upstairs to the bedroom, leaving him alone with the remains of the party and his ruined marriage. That night, I slept in the guest room with the door locked. For the first time in months, I slept deeply, without nightmares, without waking up startled in the middle of the night. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. I took my already prepared small suitcase, my Singer sewing machine, and left without making noise. I don't know if Charles was awake, if he heard my soft steps down the hallway. I didn't look back to find out. I walked to the station with the first light of day illuminating my path. Each step took me away from the naive girl I had been and brought me closer to the woman I was becoming. A woman who would no longer accept being betrayed, humiliated, or underestimated. The train arrived punctually at 7 a.m. As I boarded, I felt a mix of fear and excitement. What awaited me in New York? Would I really be able to rebuild my life? Only time would tell. But one thing I knew for sure, that Ophelia, who accepted everything quietly, who bowed her head in the face of injustice, had been left behind along with the wine-colored dress I wore the night before. Beside me, only my faithful sewing machine, some clothes, and an unshakable determination to write a different story for myself. Arriving in New York was like entering another world. As the train slowed down, approaching Grand Central Station, I looked out the window and saw the city extending in all directions, imposing, noisy, full of life. A human anthill that never slept, so different from the quiet little town I had left behind. My sister Constance was waiting for me on the platform, along with her husband Theodore. When she saw me get off the train carrying my small suitcase and the Singer sewing machine, Constance ran to hug me. We hadn't seen each other for almost 2 years since she had visited our town for our mother's funeral. "Ophelia, my sister, how happy I am to see you," she exclaimed, squeezing me in her arms. When she pulled back to look at me better, I noticed the concern in her eyes. "Is everything okay? Your letters were so vague." "It is now," I replied, forcing a smile. "I'll tell you everything calmly when we get to your house." Theodore took my suitcase and the sewing machine, commenting on the weight. "Wow, Ophelia, what do you have in here? It seems like you brought rocks as souvenirs." "Just some fabrics and my work tools. I didn't want to come empty-handed to a new life." We boarded a bus that would take us to Greenwich Village, where my sister lived. During the journey, I observed in wonder the tall buildings, the busy streets, the colorful shop windows. New York in 1964 was a city in full transformation, growing vertiginously, embracing the modernity that was arriving in large steps. Constance and Theodore's apartment was on the 3rd floor of a small building on a tree-lined street. It was modest, just 2 bedrooms, a living room, kitchen, and bathroom. But to me, it seemed like a palace. It had running water, constant electricity without the frequent power outages we faced in the countryside, and even a telephone, a luxury that few in my hometown possessed. "You'll stay in the kids' room," Constance explained, showing me a small room with 2 twin beds. "Since Marianne got married and Junior joined the army, the room is empty anyway. You can stay here as long as you need." That night, after Theodore had gone to bed, Constance and I sat in the kitchen drinking tea. It was then that I finally opened up, telling her my whole story, Charles' betrayal, my meticulous plan, the public confrontation at the birthday dinner. I spoke non-stop, the words coming out like water from a dam that finally breaks. Constance listened to everything without interrupting me, her eyes sometimes widening in surprise, sometimes narrowing in indignation. When I finished my account, she held my hands across the table. "My sister, how proud I am of you. Many women would have remained silent, accepting the humiliation quietly as we were taught to do. But you had courage." Her words were a balm for my wounded heart. That night, I cried in my sister's arms, not for the loss of the marriage or for betrayed love, but for the relief of finally being free. The first days in New York were about adaptation. The big city both frightened and fascinated me at the same time. The constant noise, the crowd of strangers, the frantic rhythm, everything was new for someone raised in the tranquility of the countryside. Constance helped me get oriented, showing me how to use the subway, where to shop, which streets to avoid. Theodore, in turn, started asking among his acquaintances if anyone needed a skilled seamstress. It was through these connections that, 2 weeks after my arrival, I got my first job in New York. The wife of one of Theodore's colleagues owned a small atelier in the garment district, an area known for its fabric and clothing trade. Mrs. Gertie, a middle-aged woman of German descent, urgently needed someone who knew how to do fine finishings on party dresses. I still remember my interview with her. I took some fabric samples I had brought with me, showing different types of hems, embroidery, and applications I knew how to make. Mrs. Gertie examined my work with critical eyes, turning the fabrics, observing the tiny stitches, testing the strength of the seams. "Where did you learn to sew like this, girl?" she finally asked. "With my mother since I was little. Then I perfected it on my own. I sewed for all the women in my town." She seemed satisfied. "You start tomorrow, 7 a.m. Don't be late. Payment is by piece, and if your work is as good as it seems, there won't be a lack of service." I left there with a light heart, feeling that things were finally falling into place. The next morning, I presented myself punctually at Mrs. Gertie's atelier. It was an old 2-story building adapted for work. On the ground floor, a shop that sold the finished dresses. On the upper floor, the workshop where 5 women worked on sewing machines in rows next to the window to take advantage of the natural light. Mrs. Gertie introduced me to the other seamstresses, Nancy, Julie, April, Irene, and Zoe, and showed me where my machine would be. To my surprise and joy, it was a brand new Singer, much more modern than mine. "This machine does chain stitch, zigzag, and even automatic buttonholes," she explained. "Can you operate it?" I looked at that technological marvel with a mix of apprehension and fascination. "I think so. Give me a day to practice, and soon I'll be familiar with it." The other seamstresses received me with kindness, especially April, a girl from Georgia who, like me, had left her homeland to start over in New York. In the first days, she patiently helped me with the new machine, showing me its secrets and tricks. The work was arduous, long hours bent over delicate fabrics, doing meticulous finishes, correcting cutting errors, transforming designs into real pieces. We started at 7 a.m. and often worked until after nightfall, especially when there were urgent orders for parties, weddings, or graduations. But contrary to what might seem, those exhausting hours didn't discourage me. On the contrary, each finished dress, each compliment from Mrs. Gertie, each satisfied customer who came back to place new orders filled me with a feeling of fulfillment that I had never experienced before. 1 month after starting to work with Mrs. Gertie, I received my first full payment. It was more money than I had ever earned at once with my sewing in the countryside. I sent part of it to Constance as a contribution to household expenses and saved the rest. I was determined to save enough to one day have my own place. It was during this time that I received the first letter from Charles. I immediately recognized his handwriting on the envelope, and my heart gave an involuntary leap. For a moment, I hesitated to open it, fearing that its contents might shake the new stability I was beginning to build. But curiosity spoke louder. The letter was a mix of apologies, laments, and pleas. Charles said he was sorry, that he had made the biggest mistake of his life, that Delilah had abandoned him right after the dinner incident, that the entire town now treated him with contempt. He recounted that he had lost his job at the railway station because the boss didn't want a man of questionable character working there. He begged me to return, promising that it would be different, that he truly loved me. At the end of the letter, almost as a secondary detail, he mentioned that he had left the house where we lived and moved to a boarding house room, as he couldn't afford the rent alone. He asked where he should send the things I had left behind. I read the letter twice, and then burned it in the kitchen stove, watching Charles' words turn to ashes. I didn't feel anger or sadness or even satisfaction at his difficult situation. I felt simply nothing. It was as if that chapter of my life was already definitively closed. I didn't respond to Charles's letter, nor to several others that followed in the subsequent months. Eventually, they stopped coming. Meanwhile, my life in New York flourished in ways I could never have imagined. After 6 months working at the atelier, Mrs. Gertie called me for a private conversation. "Look," she said, as we had coffee in her small office at the back of the shop. "I'm very satisfied with your work. You have a rare talent, not just for executing, but for creating. I've seen your drawings, the models you sketched during lunch." I blushed in embarrassment. I didn't know my little sketches had been noticed. During breaks, I liked to draw dresses, imagining new styles, different from those we made at the atelier. "Don't be embarrassed, girl. That's exactly why I called you. I have a proposal for you." Mrs. Gertie's proposal would change my life. She wanted me to start designing exclusive models for the atelier. They would be more expensive pieces aimed at a select clientele seeking originality. In addition to a fixed salary, I would receive a percentage of each dress sold based on my designs. "And there's more," she continued with a sparkle in her eyes. I'm getting old, Ophelia. My children aren't interested in the business. Michael is a lawyer. Catherine is a teacher. One day, not too distant, I'll want to retire. If everything goes well with this new line, who knows, you might become my partner in the future. I left that meeting floating with happiness. For the first time since arriving in New York, I allowed myself to dream big, not just of survival or independence, but of true success. The following months were of intense work. During the day, I continued with my regular tasks at the atelier. At night, in the small room at Constance's house, I designed new models by the light of a lamp, inspired by the fashion magazines that Mrs. Gertie lent me, French and Italian publications that showed the latest European trends. The first collection I designed, just 5 dresses, was launched in the spring of 1965. To my surprise and joy, all the pieces were sold in less than 2 weeks. The clients, women of the New York elite, were enchanted by the models that combined European elegance with an American touch, adapted to our climate and local taste. The success of this first experiment encouraged us to continue. Soon, the Ophelia line, as Mrs. Gertie decided to call it, became the main attraction of the atelier. We hired more seamstresses to handle the growing demand, and I was officially promoted to designer with a small room of my own to create. It was during this time, with my financial situation increasingly stable, that I finally realized another dream. I moved into my own apartment. It was a modest place in the same Greenwich Village neighborhood, not far from Constance's house. But it was mine. My name on the lease, my choices in decoration, my space to call home. I remember the first night in that apartment. After Constance and Theodore helped me with the move and said goodbye, I was alone, sitting in the small armchair I had bought secondhand. I looked around at the freshly painted light yellow walls, at the curtains I had sewn myself, at the few simple but cozy pieces of furniture. A wave of emotion invaded me, so strong that it made me cry. They weren't tears of sadness, but of deep gratitude and amazement. How was it possible that that young seamstress from the countryside, betrayed and humiliated, had transformed into this independent woman, respected for her talent, living in her own home, in the biggest city in America? Life had mysterious ways of leading us along unexpected paths. That night I wrote a letter, not to Charles, but to myself. A letter that I would keep and reread years later to never forget the journey traveled. Dear Ophelia of today, never forget the path you traveled to get here, the pain you felt when discovering the betrayal, the courage you had to leave everything behind, the fear you faced when arriving in an unknown city. Never forget the nights of doubt, the days of exhausting work, the small victories that brought you to this moment. You thought that Charles's betrayal had destroyed your life, but in fact, it liberated you. It liberated you to discover a strength you didn't know you possessed, a talent that would have remained dormant in the safe but limited routine of your previous life. Don't keep resentment in your heart, not for Charles, not for Delilah, not even for the fate that seemed cruel at first. Without them, without the pain they caused, you wouldn't be here now. And here is exactly where you should be. I carefully folded this letter and stored it inside my old Singer sewing machine, which now occupied a place of honor in my new home, no longer as a work tool, but as a symbol of the journey traveled. Little did I know at that moment that the journey was just beginning and that the next chapters would bring even greater surprises. Time in New York began to pass differently, faster, more intense, full of events that succeeded one another at a pace that constantly surprised me. 1966 arrived, and with it a significant change in my professional life. Mrs. Gertie, true to her word given months before, offered me a partnership in the atelier. 30% to start, she said, as we signed the papers in the accountant's office. But if we continue growing at this rate, soon we'll be equal partners. The name of the shop changed from Gertie's Atelier to Gertie and Ophelia's Atelier. A new, elegant sign was installed on the facade, and we made a small renovation inside, expanding the fitting space for clients and modernizing the showcase. To celebrate, We launched a special collection of party dresses inspired by the vibrant colors and forms of American landscapes. Success came quickly. Our clientele grew every month, attracted by the exclusive designs and impeccable finishes. We began to receive orders not just from New York, but from clients in Boston, Philadelphia, and even Chicago, who traveled especially to see our creations or contacted us by recommendation from friends. It was during this period, amid the rush of increasingly busy days, that I received an unexpected visit. It was a Wednesday afternoon. I was in the atelier adjusting the final details of a wedding dress when April, now our production manager, came to call me. "Mrs. Mitchell, there's a man asking for you downstairs in the shop. Says he came from far away." My heart leaped. Could it be Charles? After almost 2 years without news from him, was it possible that he had found me? For a moment, I considered asking April to say I wasn't available, but curiosity was stronger. I went down the stairs that led to the shop, fixing my hair and cleaning thread remains from the apron I was wearing. When I arrived in the main salon, I didn't immediately see who was looking for me. There were some clients being attended to, and a single man with his back to me, observing the displayed dresses. "Can I help you?" I asked, approaching. When he turned, I didn't immediately recognize his face. He was a middle-aged man, with gray hair at the temples and tired eyes. He wore a simple suit, a bit worn at the elbows, and held a hat in his hands. "Mrs. Ophelia Mitchell?" he asked, with a voice that carried the unmistakable accent of the Kentucky countryside. "Yes, that's me. How can I help you?" He hesitated for a moment, seeming to choose his words. "My name is Gerald Freeman. I was Charles's father." I felt my legs weaken. "Mr. Gerald, how did I not recognize you?" Of course, he was much older, more worn out than in my memories. The years hadn't been kind to him. "Mr. Gerald, forgive me for not recognizing you. Please, come with me." I took him to the small room in the back that we used for meetings. I offered coffee, which he accepted with a nod. While serving the cups, my mind was buzzing with questions. Why would he be here? What did he want from me after so long? "You came from so far away," I commented, trying to break the awkward silence. "How did you find me?" "Your sister, Constance, isn't it? She maintained contact with some acquaintances in town. When she learned I was coming to New York for medical treatment, she gave me your address." I nodded, waiting for him to continue. Mr. Gerald took a long sip of coffee, as if seeking courage in the depths of the cup. "Mrs. Mitchell, I came here because I have a message for you. It's about Charles." My heart raced. "Is he well?" A sad smile crossed the old man's wrinkled face. "No, my child, Charles is not well. In fact, he passed away 3 months ago." The news hit me like a punch to the stomach. Charles dead. The man who had been my husband, who had shared my bed for 3 years, with whom I had dreamed of building a family, no longer existed. It was difficult to process. "How?" "Ah," was all I managed to ask. "Pneumonia. It started as a flu, but he let it advance too much before seeking the doctor. He was always stubborn, you know. When he finally went to Dr. Arthur, both his lungs were already compromised. There wasn't much that could be done." I was silent, trying to absorb the news. I didn't feel the lacerating pain one expects when losing someone loved. That love had died long before, on the afternoon when I heard Charles laughing at my naivety with Delilah, but I felt a deep sadness, a lament for the wasted life, for the dreams that weren't realized, for the man Charles could have been if he had made different choices. "I'm sorry," I finally said. "Mrs. Eleanor must be devastated. She left us last year, Hart. I think she never fully recovered after that night. You know which one I'm referring to." I nodded, a knot forming in my throat. The night of Charles's birthday, when I exposed the betrayal in front of everyone. I had never considered how that would affect his parents. "Mr. Gerald, You don't need to say anything, my child," he interrupted, raising a calloused hand. "You did what you needed to do. Charles was wrong, and wrong badly. No one can blame you for leaving. He rummaged in the inside pocket of his jacket and took out a yellowed envelope. Charles wrote this in his last weeks. He asked me to find you and deliver it if something happened to him. I think he already knew he didn't have much time. I extended a trembling hand and took the envelope. My name was written on the front, in the handwriting I knew so well, but now trembling, hesitant, the writing of someone debilitated. I don't know what's written in there, Mr. Gerald continued, but I know my son. I knew my son. In the last years, he changed a lot. After you left, after he lost his job and his reputation, he became another man, quieter, more serious. He started working in the fields with his own hands, something he had always despised. He stopped drinking, stopped frequenting the bar, went to church every Sunday. I looked at the envelope in my hands, feeling its symbolic weight. He never married again, never got involved with anyone as far as I know, added Mr. Gerald. He lived alone, on a small farm he bought on the outskirts of town. He always asked about you, if I or Eleanor had any news. I think he never stopped regretting. I remained silent, absorbing this information. It was strange to imagine Charles living like that, solitary, working the land, tormented by regrets, so different from the ambitious and sociable young man I had known. And Delilah? I asked, surprised at my own curiosity. Ah, she left town right after that night. Went to California, they say. Married a businessman there, from what I heard. Never showed up in our parts again. We were silent for a few moments, each lost in our own thoughts. Finally, Mr. Gerald stood up, putting the worn hat on his head. Well, I've fulfilled my promise. I need to go now. My bus back leaves in 2 hours. It was good to see you, Mrs. Mitchell. I'm glad you're doing well. I accompanied him to the door of the shop. Before leaving, he turned and looked at me with moist eyes. He asked me to tell you one more thing if I found you. He asked me to say that you were right that night, that the best revenge is indeed living well. After Mr. Gerald left, I returned to my office and closed the door. I looked long at the envelope in my hands, undecided. Part of me wanted to tear it up without reading, to leave the past definitively behind. But another part, perhaps the wiser one, knew I needed this closure. I opened the envelope carefully and unfolded the letter. Dear Ophelia, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer among the living. It also means that my father managed to find you, which fills me with relief. There are so many things I would like to tell you, so many requests for forgiveness I would like to make. But I know words are insufficient to repair the harm I caused. I don't expect your forgiveness, nor do I intend to justify my actions. I just want you to know that the years without you were my true punishment, much worse than the loss of my job, than the looks of contempt in town, than the loneliness. Each day I woke up thinking about how it would be if I had made different choices, if I had valued the extraordinary woman I had by my side instead of seeking empty thrills in the arms of another. If I had recognized your strength, your intelligence, your value, instead of ridiculing them. I learned through acquaintances that you've become a successful woman in New York. It doesn't surprise me. You always had within you a strength that I, in my arrogance, didn't know how to see. I hope you are happy, Ophelia. I hope you have found someone who values you as you deserve, who sees in you everything that I wasn't capable of seeing. And I hope that from time to time, in some corner of your memory, you can remember the first years of our marriage, not with bitterness, but with the gentleness that was always part of your nature. Goodbye, my Ophelia, who was never really mine, Charles. I folded the letter slowly, tears silently streaming down my face. I wasn't crying for lost love, nor for longing. I was crying for the tragedy of human life, for the paths we take and cannot undo, for the regrets we carry until the end. I kept the letter in a box where I maintained important memories, along with my first contract as a partner, the first advertisement for the atelier in a New York newspaper, the letter I had written to myself on that first night in my apartment. That unexpected visit from Mr. Gerald and Charles's letter made me reflect deeply on the direction my life had taken. I realized that, despite the initial pain, Charles's betrayal had been an essential turning point. If it weren't for that painful discovery, perhaps I would still be in that small town in the countryside, sewing dresses for the wives of local merchants, accepting a life smaller than what I could have. In the months that followed, I immersed myself even more intensely in work. Gertie and Ophelia's atelier continued to prosper, and we began to consider opening a second shop, this time in the Upper East Side, an elegant New York neighborhood where our most affluent clientele resided. It was during the search for a commercial location in that area that I met August Mitchell. He was a real estate broker specializing in high-standard commercial properties. A tall man with an elegant bearing, prematurely gray hair, and a captivating smile. Widowed for 5 years, father of a 10-year-old girl named Lucy. Our relationship began strictly professional. August showed us various properties, patiently explaining the advantages and disadvantages of each one, advising us on the best contracts, negotiating favorable conditions with the owners. I was impressed by his honesty and professionalism, qualities I had learned to value after my experience with Charles. After we finally chose the perfect location for our new shop, a renovated old house on Madison Avenue, August invited me for coffee to celebrate closing the deal. I accepted without thinking much, seeing it just as a professional courtesy. But that coffee extended for hours. We talked about everything: my trajectory since arriving in New York, his work as a broker, the daughter he had been raising alone since his wife's death from cancer, our literary tastes. We discovered a shared passion for Hemingway, our vision of the city that was growing visibly. When we said goodbye, it was already night. August asked, with a shyness that contrasted with his generally confident posture, if we could meet again. Just to continue our conversation, he quickly added. I hesitated. Since Charles' betrayal, I had built walls around my heart. I had focused so much on my independence, on my professional growth, that I practically excluded the possibility of a new relationship. There had been some suitors over the years, of course. New York was full of single or widowed men who didn't mind a divorced woman, especially one with her own business. But I always found excuses to keep them at a distance. Something about August, however, sparked my curiosity. Perhaps it was his quiet intelligence or the respectful way he treated me, not as a fragile woman who needed protection, nor as an object of desire, but as an equal, a conversation partner. Yes, I finally replied. We can meet again. That was the beginning of a courtship that surprised me by the naturalness with which it developed. August was patient, never pushing me beyond what I was ready to offer. He understood my past, my fears, my scars. He introduced me to his daughter Lucy only when he felt our relationship was solid enough. Lucy, a serious and intelligent girl so similar to her father, won my heart from the first meeting. Motherless since she was 5, she yearned for a female presence in her life. Someone who could understand the transformations her body was beginning to go through. Someone with whom to share secrets that a father, no matter how loving, could never fully understand. Our relationship evolved slowly, with the respect and caution of those who have already known suffering and don't wish to repeat it. August never mentioned marriage, understanding that this word carried painful connotations for me. Instead, he talked about building a life together, about forming a family, expressions that didn't provoke bitter memories. When I finally accepted moving into August and Lucy's house in Brooklyn Heights, I felt I was definitively closing a chapter of my life and starting another, written not by pain or the need to prove something, but by the genuine desire to share my existence with people I loved. Our house was spacious and bright, with a small garden in the back, where August cultivated roses. Lucy had her own room decorated with books and a desk where she spent hours studying. I transformed the old guest room into a small personal atelier where I could work on designs and prototypes when I needed to bring work home. It was in this house, 3 years after our first coffee, that August finally asked me the question he had avoided for so long. We were in the garden on a Sunday afternoon, observing Lucy, now a 13-year-old teenager, reading under the shade of a tree. "Ophelia," he said, taking my hand in his. "I know that marriage doesn't bring good memories for you, but I would like you to consider the possibility of us getting married. Not for social convention, not for family pressure, but because I want Lucy to have the security of knowing you will legally be part of our family, whatever happens." I looked at Lucy, absorbed in her book, oblivious to the conversation that would change our lives. I looked at August with his sincere eyes and gentle smile. I thought about how I had arrived here, the frightened young woman who disembarked at Grand Central Station with only a suitcase and a sewing machine, the determined woman who became a partner in a successful atelier, the person who had finally learned to open her heart again. "Yes," I replied simply. "Yes, August, let's get married." Our wedding was a simple ceremony, just with close friends and family. Mrs. Gertie was my matron of honor, radiant in the dress I had designed especially for her. Constance and Theodore came with their now-grown children. Lucy, proud in her first party dress, seemed happier than all of us combined. As I pronounced my vows, I couldn't help but think about how life comes full circle. The same institution that had brought me so much pain now offered me a new chance at happiness. The same words I had pronounced years ago before Charles now gained a completely new meaning before August. The life we built together, August, Lucy, and I, wasn't perfect, because no human life is. We had our challenges, our disagreements, moments of doubt and fatigue, but we had many more moments of joy, of companionship, of joint growth. 2 years after our wedding, when Lucy was 15, I discovered I was pregnant. An immense surprise for someone who, at 31, had already given up on the idea of having biological children. Our daughter Constance was born strong and healthy, bringing a new dimension of love to our lives. Gertie and Ophelia's atelier continued to grow, expanding to a third shop, this time in Chicago. When Mrs. Gertie finally retired in 1976, she transferred her part of the business to me, with the condition that we keep her name in the brand, so that no one forgets where it all began, she said with that pragmatism that always characterized her. Today, looking back at 82 years old, I see the complete trajectory. The naive girl from the countryside, who dreamed only of being a good wife. The betrayed young woman who transformed her pain into determination. The businesswoman who conquered her space in a big and relentless city. The wife and mother who rediscovered love when she least expected it. Each phase had its importance, each challenge its purpose. Even Charles's betrayal, which at the time seemed like the end of the world, revealed itself as a necessary detour on the path to the life I was really meant to live. If there's a lesson I would like to leave for you who are watching me now, it's this. There is no pain that cannot be transformed into strength. There is no betrayal so deep that it cannot open the way for something better. There is no end that cannot also be a beginning. The revenge I planned on that night so many years ago ended up being much more powerful than I could ever have imagined. It wasn't just the moment of public embarrassment for Charles, nor the social consequences he suffered. The true revenge was the full life I built, the dreams I realized, the love I found, everything that would never have been possible if I had remained in that unhappy marriage. As the old saying my mother always repeated goes, God writes straight with crooked lines, and sometimes it's precisely the most crooked lines that lead us to the most beautiful destinations. Before closing, I would like to ask once more for you to like this video, subscribe to the Grandma's Diary channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any story. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and if this story touched your heart. Your likes and subscriptions encourage me to continue sharing my life experiences with you. Thank you very much for listening to me up to this point, and until the next story.